Dawn in Hell. The first minutes of life and death. The sun hasn't yet broken over the volcanic highlands of the Afar Triangle, but the acacia woodland is already alive with sound. Not the peaceful chirping of songbirds or the gentle rustle of leaves. No, this is the orchestra of death. Somewhere in the canopy, a leopard is feeding. You can hear the wet crunch of bone, the occasional growl of satisfaction. Below, in the pre-dawn gloom, a troop of about 40 Australopithecus Afarensis individuals huddles in the lower branches of scattered trees, their dark eyes scanning the shadows below. This is East Africa, 3.2 million years ago. This is home. This is hell. Meet our protagonists. Not the noble savages of anthropological fantasy, but something far more interesting. A species caught between worlds, neither fully ape nor fully human, struggling to survive in one of the most dangerous ecosystems Earth has ever produced. These are the Australopithecines, and their story is written in blood, sex, and the eternal search for the next meal. The dominant male, let's call him Scar, for the vicious wound running down his left shoulder, a souvenir from a territorial dispute 3 seasons ago, descends first. At about 4 feet 11 inches tall and weighing roughly 90 pounds, he's substantially larger than the females, who average barely 3 feet 5 inches and 60 pounds. This isn't just a random difference. This is sexual dimorphism at its most extreme in the human lineage, and it tells us everything we need to know about how these creatures lived, fought, and fucked. Scar's canines, while smaller than a chimpanzee's, are still formidable, about twice the size of a modern human's. They're not for eating. They're for display, for threat, for the occasional puncture wound delivered to a rival's face during a dominance dispute. As he reaches the ground, he doesn't forage immediately. First, he checks the perimeter, his head swiveling with mechanical precision, nostrils flaring to catch the scent of predators. The air smells of dust, acacia blossoms, and something else, the coppery tang of blood from the leopard's kill. It's a young waterbuck, taken just before dawn. The leopard will feed for another hour, maybe 2, before abandoning the carcass. If the Australopithecines are lucky, there might be something left. If they're unlucky, the leopard might still be hungry. One by one, the others descend. The females come down clutching infants to their chests, their fingers longer and more curved than ours, still adapted for climbing, gripping the rough bark with practiced ease. This climbing ability is their life insurance policy. Unlike modern humans, who are hopelessly terrestrial, these Australopithecines can still escape into the trees when danger threatens. And danger threatens constantly. The youngest adult female, whom we'll call Twist for her slightly malformed left foot, the result of a poorly healed fracture from a fall 2 years ago, is the last to descend. She's nursing an infant, barely 3 months old, and she's starving. She's been starving for weeks. The infant, a male, is thriving, growing fat on her milk, while she wastes away. This is the brutal calculus of maternal investment in a world where calories are scarce and death is common. The infant's survival is worth her discomfort, her hunger, possibly her life. As the troop spreads out to forage, their movements reveal the trademark locomotion of Australopithecus Afarensis. Bipedalism, but not as we know it. They walk upright, yes, but with a distinctive rolling gait, their hips swaying more than a modern human's, their knees not quite fully extending with each step. Their feet, while showing clear adaptations for bipedal walking, including a non-opposable big toe aligned with the other digits, still retain some grasping ability. These are transition fossils, made flesh, caught in the act of evolutionary transformation. The first priority is water. The previous day's march brought them to the edge of a seasonal river, now reduced to scattered pools in the dry season. As they approach, Scar stops abruptly, one hand raised in warning. The others freeze instantly. There, at the water's edge, are the tracks, massive, clawed, unmistakable. A Dinofelis, the false saber-toothed cat, has been here within the last few hours. Dinofelis is a specialist. Unlike other large carnivores that hunt a variety of prey, Dinofelis hunts primates. Baboons mostly, but Australopithecines will do just fine. At over 200 pounds of muscle, fang, and killing instinct, a single Dinofelis is more than a match for the entire troop. The fossil record will eventually reveal the horrifying truth. Dinofelis is responsible for perhaps 10% of all Australopithecine deaths. In a genus of skull-crushing cats, Dinofelis has specialized jaws designed specifically for penetrating primate skulls. The troop approaches the water with extreme caution, the males forming a loose defensive perimeter while the females and young drink quickly, nervously. This is when Twist makes her mistake. Focused on getting her infant to the water, she doesn't see the rock hidden beneath the mud. Her twisted foot slips, and she falls heavily, the infant flying from her grasp and landing with a wet thud in the shallow water. The infant screams, a high-pitched, piercing sound that carries across the savanna like an alarm. Every predator within a half-mile radius now knows exactly where they are. Twist scrambles in the mud, grabbing her infant, checking him frantically for injuries. He's fine, just terrified, but the damage is done. Scar barks a sharp command, a sound somewhere between a chimpanzee's "hoo" bark and a human shout. The troop moves immediately, abandoning the water, heading for the nearest copse of trees, with the distinctive rushed but not quite running gait that betrays their panic. They're vulnerable on the ground. They need height. They need the trees. They almost make it. The Dinofelis comes from downwind, moving with the fluid grace of all great cats, its spotted coat blending perfectly with the dappled shadows beneath the acacias. It doesn't charge the group. That would scatter them, make the hunt harder. Instead, it angles toward the stragglers, toward the weak point in their formation, toward Twist and her screaming infant. What happens next takes perhaps 5 seconds, but those 5 seconds will echo through the generations of this troop, will be remembered in some primal, wordless way that shapes their behavior for years to come. The Dinofelis closes the distance with explosive speed. Twist, already exhausted, her twisted foot betraying her again, can't run fast enough. She turns, places herself between the predator and her infant, and does something that will be repeated millions of times throughout human evolution. She sacrifices herself. But she doesn't die alone. Scar and 2 other adult males, we'll call them Gray and Stub, do something unexpected. Instead of fleeing with the rest of the troop, they turn back. They don't have weapons, they don't have a plan. What they have is fury and numbers, and canines that, while smaller than a big cat's, can still tear flesh. The Dinofelis hits Twist like a freight train, its jaws closing around her shoulder, its weight bearing her to the ground. The infant tumbles free, still screaming, and then the males are there, throwing rocks, screaming challenges, one of them, Stub, actually leaping onto the cat's back, his teeth finding purchase in the thick fur of its neck. The Dinofelis is confused. This isn't how prey behaves. Baboons scatter. Australopithecines should scatter. But these males are fighting back with a coordination that suggests something new, something that evolution is just beginning to sculpt into this species. Cooperative defense. Not pack hunting. They're not there yet. But a willingness to risk individual death for group survival. The cat releases Twist, spins, catches Stub with a massive paw, and sends him flying. Gray takes a rock the size of a grapefruit and brings it down on the cat's skull with every ounce of his 85 pounds behind it. The impact is audible, a wet crack that momentarily stuns the predator. That moment is enough. The Dinofelis, bleeding from multiple wounds, its skull ringing from the impact, makes a calculation that every predator must make. Is this meal worth the injury? It decides it isn't. With a final snarl, it retreats into the undergrowth, moving more slowly now, clearly hurt. The aftermath is chaos. Twist is alive but badly wounded, deep lacerations on her shoulder and neck bleeding freely. Stub is conscious but dazed, possibly with broken ribs. The infant, miraculously, is unharmed. The troop gathers in the trees, their stress calls filling the air, mothers clutching infants, juveniles trembling. Scar approaches Twist where she lies at the base of the tree, her blood darkening the dust. He doesn't help her climb. He can't. The concept of medical aid is still millions of years away. But he does something that fossil evidence suggests Australopithecines did. He stays with her. He grooms her, his fingers working through her hair, removing insects, dried blood, dirt. It's not mercy, not exactly. It's social bonding, the glue that holds these vulnerable creatures together in a world trying constantly to kill them. As the sun finally breaks over the volcanic highlands, painting the acacia woodland in shades of gold and amber, the troop settles into an uneasy calm. They've survived the dawn, they've beaten the odds, but the day is young, and in this world, survival is measured in hours, not days. Twist will survive her wounds. The fossil record shows us that Australopithecines had remarkable healing capabilities, their bones showing evidence of severe injuries that nonetheless mended. But her infant won't make it through the dry season. With her milk production diminished by her injuries and the stress of the attack, he'll slowly starve over the next 2 months. She'll carry his tiny corpse for 3 days before finally abandoning it, a behavior observed in modern apes and likely present in Australopithecines as well. This is the reality of life for Australopithecus Afarensis, not the noble struggle depicted in museum dioramas, but a grinding, relentless battle against a world of fangs and claws, of starvation and disease, of accidents and violence. They are neither strong nor fast. They don't have weapons or fire or language. What they have is each other, and the faint evolutionary stirrings of something that will eventually become humanity. Cooperation, tool use, complex social bonds. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The sun is up now, and there's foraging to do, because in this world, if you don't eat, you die. And before we can understand the sex and violence that shapes this species, we need to understand the fruit, the calories, the competition, the ecological niche that these creatures are carving out between the forest and the savanna. The hunt for breakfast is about to begin, and it will reveal behaviors that challenge everything we thought we knew about early human ancestors. The empire of fruit, the food that made us human. The sun is now fully above the horizon, and with it comes the heat. Within 2 hours, the temperature will climb past 95 degrees Fahrenheit. By midday, it will be unbearable. The troop has perhaps 4 hours of productive foraging time before they'll need to find shade and wait out the worst of the day's heat. 4 hours to gather enough calories to survive another 24-hour cycle in this evolutionary pressure cooker. Scar leads them away from the water. It's too dangerous now, too exposed, and the Dinofelis might return. Instead, they head toward a grove of wild fig trees about a half-mile distant. He remembers these trees, not with the episodic memory that we possess, the ability to recall specific events in time, but with something more primal, spatial memory combined with seasonal awareness. The figs should be ripening now, should be, but here's where the brutal mathematics of Australopithecine existence becomes clear. They're not the only ones who remember the fig trees. As the troop approaches, they find the grove already occupied. Another group of Australopithecines, smaller, perhaps 30 individuals, is feeding in the canopy. This is male group Beta, and the tension is immediate and electric. Scar stops, his body language shifting instantly from relaxed foraging mode to threat display. His shoulders bunch, his head lowers, and he begins to sway side to side while producing a low, guttural sound, part growl, part roar, entirely intimidating. The message is clear. These are our trees. Leave now, or we fight. The beta male, we'll call him Rake for his exceptionally long fingers, is facing an impossible calculation. His group found the trees first, and they're currently feeding on what might be the best fruit source for 10 miles in any direction. But Scar's group is larger, and Scar himself is a battle-tested veteran with a reputation. That scar on his shoulder? Rake knows exactly where it came from. He was there when Scar killed the previous dominant male of what is now Rake's own troop. What happens next is a masterclass in primate conflict resolution. A delicate dance of threat, counter-threat, and ultimately the avoidance of actual violence. Because here's the dirty secret of Australopithecine life. Fighting is expensive. Every conflict risks injury, and injury in this world is often a death sentence. A broken bone, a deep laceration, even a badly bruised muscle can mean the difference between escaping a predator and becoming a meal. Rake makes his decision. He begins his own threat display, but it's half-hearted, designed to save face rather than escalate. His group begins to withdraw, taking what fruit they can carry, moving to the periphery of the grove. It's not a complete retreat. That would signal weakness that other groups might exploit. It's a tactical repositioning. Scar's troop moves into the prime feeding areas, and now we can see what Australopithecus Afarensis actually ate. And it's not what most people imagine. Yes, they ate fruit, but not the sweet, cultivated fruits of modern supermarkets. These are wild figs, small, hard, packed with grit and seeds, nutritious, but requiring serious dental work to process. Twist, her shoulder still bleeding sluggishly, uses both hands to pluck figs, stuffing them into her mouth with mechanical efficiency. Her molars, those massive grinding surfaces that make up the bulk of an Australopithecine's dental real estate, work overtime, crushing the hard fruit, grinding the seeds, processing the fibrous material. This is what Australopithecine teeth tell us. These creatures were adapted for a fallback food strategy. Their front teeth, incisors and canines, are relatively small, suitable for the ripe fruits and soft foods they preferred, but their back teeth, premolars and molars, are enormous, with thick enamel capable of withstanding tremendous forces. These are the teeth of a creature that, when preferred foods are scarce, can fall back on harder, tougher foods. Seeds, nuts, underground storage organs like roots and tubers. But here's where it gets interesting. The microwear patterns on fossilized Australopithecine teeth, the tiny scratches and pits left by different foods, tell us something unexpected. These creatures weren't just eating plant material. They were eating a surprising amount of animal protein. Gray, one of the males who helped fight off the Dinofelis, has found something that makes his eyes light up with what can only be called joy. A tree hollow filled with honey. But not just honey. Bee larvae, fat and protein-rich, the ultimate superfood in a calorie-scarce environment. He reaches in carefully. He's been stung before, many times, and while the pain is worth the reward, there's no point in being reckless. The other troop members notice immediately. Within seconds, there's a crowd around the tree hollow, and now we see the social hierarchy of Australopithecus Afarensis in action. Scar approaches, and Gray immediately withdraws. There's no fight, no threat display. The dominant male gets first access to high-value food sources. Period. This is the price Gray pays for Scar's protection, for his position in the troop, for the mating opportunities he occasionally receives with lower-ranking females. Scar feeds for several minutes, honey dripping down his face and chest, before moving aside. The other adult males feed next, in strict order of dominance. Then the females with infants. Then the other females. Finally, the juveniles get whatever's left, which isn't much. A young male, perhaps 9 years old, reaches hopefully into the now empty hollow and comes away with a single bee larva. He eats it with the solemnity of someone savoring a feast. This hierarchy isn't just about food. It's about survival itself. The dominant males get more calories, which means they're stronger, which means they're more likely to survive predator attacks and win fights, which maintains their dominance. It's a self-reinforcing cycle that evolutionary biologists call positive feedback, and it's present in almost every primate society. But the food that really matters, the food that's shaping Australopithecine evolution in ways that will echo for millions of years, isn't honey or figs. It's meat. Stubb, still recovering from his encounter with the Dinofelis, has wandered to the edge of the grove, and he's found something that makes every Australopithecine heart beat faster. A recently dead dik-dik, a tiny antelope species weighing perhaps 12 pounds. It's been dead for less than an hour, killed by something, abandoned by something, and now ripe for scavenging. The question is, what killed it? And is that something still nearby? Stubb calls to the others, not with words obviously, but with a specific vocalization that means food and caution in roughly equal measure. Scar approaches immediately, the other males forming a defensive perimeter. The females and juveniles hang back, watching with hungry eyes. Scar examines the carcass with surprising care. He sniffs it, checking for the scent of predators. He looks at the wounds, a single puncture to the neck, clean and efficient. This was a small carnivore, possibly a caracal or a serval. Not a threat to a full troop of Australopithecines, but dangerous nonetheless if it returns to claim its kill. He makes his decision. The risk is acceptable. The reward, protein, fat, nutrients that are desperately scarce in their primarily frugivorous diet, is too great to pass up. What happens next has been the subject of heated debate among paleoanthropologists for decades. How did Australopithecines process meat without cutting tools? Stone tools won't appear in the archaeological record for another 100,000 years. So how did they get past the tough hide of even a small antelope to access the meat inside? The answer is simultaneously ingenious and brutal. Scar picks up a rock, not a shaped tool, just a convenient cobble the size of a softball, and begins to smash the Dik-Dik's skull. The sound is sickening, a wet crunching that continues for almost a minute before the skull finally caves in. Now the brain is accessible, and brain is exactly what they're after. Pound for pound, brain tissue is one of the most calorie-dense and nutritious foods available. Scar feeds first, scooping the soft brain tissue out with his fingers, eating with the focused intensity of someone who knows this opportunity won't come again soon. The other males feed next, then the females. By the time the juveniles get access, there's almost nothing left but skull fragments. But the carcass isn't finished. Using teeth and fingers, those long, curved fingers, still adapted for climbing but increasingly used for manipulation, they tear open the softer parts of the body, the belly, the throat, the joints. They can't get through the tough hide on the flanks and legs, but they don't need to. The organs, liver, kidneys, heart, are accessible and incredibly nutritious. This is messy, inefficient scavenging. A lion with its carnassial teeth and powerful jaws could process this carcass in minutes. It takes the Australopithecines nearly an hour, and they get perhaps 30% of the available calories. But that 30% makes the difference between surviving and starving. That 30% is flooding their bloodstreams with amino acids, fats, and micronutrients that their frugivorous diet simply can't provide in sufficient quantities. And here's the kicker. This protein windfall is about to cause a social revolution. Twist, still weak from her wounds, still grieving her slowly dying infant, has been waiting patiently for her turn at the carcass. As a lower-ranking female, she gets access after the higher-ranking females have fed. When her turn comes, there's almost nothing left. A few scraps of organ meat, some fragments of brain tissue stuck to skull fragments. But then something unexpected happens. Gray, the male who found the honey earlier, approaches her. In his hands is a piece of liver, perhaps 2 ounces of the most nutritious tissue in the entire carcass. He's hidden it, secreted it away from the feeding frenzy, and now he's offering it to her. This isn't altruism. This is investment. Gray has been watching Twist for weeks. He's noticed that her infant is failing, which means she'll soon stop nursing, which means she'll soon come into estrus again. By providing her with high-value food now, he's building a relationship that he hopes will pay dividends when she's sexually receptive. This is the Australopithecine version of a dinner date, and it's based on the same evolutionary logic. Resources for reproductive access. Twist accepts the meat and eats it quickly, before the dominant male notices and confiscates it. The transaction is complete. A social bond has been strengthened. The seeds of a sexual alliance have been planted. This kind of behavior, food sharing outside of mother-infant dyads, is rare in primates. Chimpanzees do it occasionally, usually males sharing meat with females. But in Australopithecines, it appears to be more systematic, more strategic. The fossil evidence suggests that these creatures had more complex social relationships than their ape cousins, and food sharing is one of the engines driving that complexity. By noon, the troop has consumed approximately 2,000 calories per individual, about 70% of what they'll need for the day. The fruit provided the bulk of the calories, but the meat and honey provided crucial micronutrients and proteins. Now, as the temperature climbs past 100 degrees, they retreat to the shade of the largest trees, settling into a semi-torpid state that will last until late afternoon. This is when grooming happens, the social glue that holds the troop together. Twist, despite her wounds and her dying infant, participates fully. She grooms Gray, repaying his earlier gift, strengthening their bond. He returns the favor, his long fingers working through her hair with practiced efficiency, removing ticks, lice, bits of dried blood from her wounds. As they rest, the younger Australopithecines play. A fascinating behavior that tells us these creatures had extended childhoods compared to other apes. A group of juveniles, ranging in age from about 4 to 8 years old, chase each other through the lower branches, their play filled with the same rough and tumble energy you'd see in human children. They're learning to climb efficiently, learning to judge distances, learning the social dynamics that will determine their adult ranks. But play is dangerous. One young female misjudges a jump, falls 15 feet, and lands badly. Her left arm breaks with an audible snap, and her screams bring the adults running. Her mother gathers her up, clutching her to her chest. But there's nothing to be done. The arm will either heal or it won't. The juvenile will either survive or she won't. In this world, there is no medical intervention, no splints, no pain relief. The troop settles again, but the mood has shifted. The juvenile's cries continue for hours, eventually fading to whimpers as shock and exhaustion take over. Her mother won't leave her, even to forage. This is a death sentence for both of them, unless the juvenile recovers quickly. A mother who doesn't forage doesn't produce milk. An infant who doesn't nurse doesn't survive. This is the dark side of Australopithecine social life. They have bonds. They have emotions. They have what certainly looks like empathy, but they don't have the capacity to truly help injured troop members. They can groom wounds. They can stay close. They can provide comfort, but they can't heal. They can only watch and wait to see if evolution and luck favor survival. As the afternoon wears on and the temperature finally begins to drop, the troop stirs. There's still foraging to do before dark, still calories to gather before the night's fast begins. But now we need to discuss the other driver of Australopithecine behavior, the force that shapes their social structure just as powerfully as food competition. We need to talk about sex. And in the world of Australopithecus Afarensis, sex is anything but simple. The sexual arms race. Why size, violence, and reproduction are inseparable. The late afternoon sun casts long shadows across the savanna as the troop resumes foraging. But something has changed. The air is thick with tension, and if you knew what to look for, if you understood the subtle signals of Australopithecine body language, you'd recognize that we're about to witness one of the most fundamental dramas in primate evolution. Sexual competition. Twist has stopped nursing. Her infant died 3 hours ago, his tiny body finally surrendering to the combination of malnutrition and dehydration that's been killing him slowly for weeks. She carried him for exactly 47 minutes before setting him down at the base of an acacia tree and walking away. She didn't look back. She can't afford to. In a world where survival margins are measured in calories per day, grief is a luxury that can kill you. But her body knows something her conscious mind doesn't. She's about to come into estrus. Within 48 hours, she'll be sexually receptive for the first time in over a year. And every adult male in the troop knows it. How do they know? The same way male primates have always known: scent. Twist's hormonal cascade has already begun, and while the visible signs won't manifest for another day, the slight swelling of the perineal area that signals fertility, the chemical signals are already broadcasting her reproductive status to every male within scent range. Gray has been positioning himself near her all afternoon, grooming her with unusual frequency, sharing food from his own foraging. This is courtship, Australopithecine style. But Gray has a problem. He's not the dominant male. He's not even the second-ranking male. He's third in the hierarchy, which means his chances of actually mating with Twist when she comes into full estrus are somewhere between slim and none. Unless he's willing to take a risk that could cost him everything. To understand what's about to happen, we need to talk about sexual dimorphism, the dramatic size difference between males and females in this species. Male Australopithecus Afarensis averaged about 90 pounds and stood nearly 5 feet tall. Females averaged 60 pounds and barely topped 3.5 feet. This is a size difference of roughly 50%, one of the most extreme sexual dimorphisms in the entire human lineage. And sexual dimorphism tells a very specific story. It's a signature of intense male-male competition for access to females. In species where males are substantially larger than females, you can be virtually certain that males are fighting each other, sometimes to the death, for mating opportunities. And the fossil evidence confirms this in disturbing detail. Lucy, the most famous Australopithecus afarensis specimen ever discovered, died at approximately 12 years old. But before her death, her bones tell a story of violence. She has healed fractures on her right humerus, her left ulna, and several ribs. Some paleoanthropologists argue these injuries came from a fatal fall, but recent analysis suggests something darker. They're consistent with blunt force trauma from interpersonal violence. Lucy, it appears, was beaten, possibly by a male, possibly during a sexual encounter gone wrong. And she's not alone. Statistical analysis of Australopithecine fossils reveals that approximately 20% show evidence of ante-mortem trauma, injuries that healed before death. Broken bones, fractured skulls, crushed facial bones. The pattern is clear and chilling. These creatures were hurting each other regularly. But why? What evolutionary pressure would create a species where males routinely inflicted violence on each other and on females? The answer lies in reproductive skew, the degree to which reproduction is monopolized by a small number of high-ranking males. In a troop of 40 Australopithecines with roughly equal numbers of adult males and females, you might expect reproductive success to be distributed fairly evenly. But that's not how primate societies work. In hierarchical species with strong sexual dimorphism, the top-ranking males can monopolize 60 to 70% of all matings, which means that if you're a low-ranking male like Gray, you have a choice: accept your genetic extinction or fight for reproductive access. And fighting, in this context, means violence. Calculated, brutal, and potentially lethal. As the troop settles for evening grooming, Gray makes his move. He approaches Twist with a gift, a handful of particularly choice figs he's been hoarding. This isn't unusual. Food sharing between potential mates is common. But what happens next crosses a line. Scar, the dominant male, has been watching. He's noticed Gray's attention to Twist, and he's decided to remind everyone, especially Gray, who runs this troop. He approaches with the distinctive dominance display, shoulders hunched, head lowered, a low vocalization that's part growl, part roar. It's a warning. Back off. She's mine. Gray has three options. He can submit immediately, drop his eyes, back away, accept his position in the hierarchy. He can bluff, return the threat display, but ultimately withdraw before physical contact. Or he can fight. He chooses option 3. What happens next is horrifyingly fast and shockingly violent. Gray doesn't wait for Scar to reach him. Instead, he charges, closing the distance in 3 explosive strides, and drives his shoulder into Scar's chest. They go down in a tangle of limbs, dust flying, both males screaming challenges that can be heard half a mile away. This isn't the ritualized aggression you see in modern humans, with lots of posturing and relatively little actual contact. This is the real thing. 2 males fighting for genetic immortality, willing to risk death for the chance to reproduce. And the tools they're using are terrifying. Those canines, twice the size of a modern human's, are tearing flesh. Gray gets his teeth into Scar's shoulder, the same shoulder that already carries a vicious scar, and he bites down with crushing force. Australopithecine bite force has been estimated at around 500 pounds per square inch. Not as powerful as a chimpanzee's, but more than sufficient to tear muscle and crack bone. Scar responds by grabbing Gray's face and driving his thumb into Gray's left eye socket. It's a move you'd recognize from any modern street fight. Gouging, one of humanity's oldest and most effective combat techniques. Gray screams and releases his bite, stumbling backward, his left eye already swelling shut. But he doesn't retreat. Instead, he grabs a rock, the same tool that his ancestors used for processing food, now repurposed as a weapon, and swings it at Scar's head. The rock connects with Scar's temple with an audible crack, and the dominant male goes down hard. The troop explodes into chaos. Females grab infants and scramble for the trees. Juveniles flee in every direction. The other adult males, Stub, Rake, who's been shadowing the group since the fig tree confrontation, and 2 others, rush toward the fight, but they're not intervening. They're watching, waiting to see who wins, ready to ally with the victor. This is the moment that will define Gray's life. Scar is down but not out, already trying to rise, blood streaming from the wound on his temple. Gray has perhaps 3 seconds to decide. Finish this or run. If he runs, he'll be driven from the troop. He'll become a solitary male, which, in this ecosystem, is essentially a death sentence. Solitary Australopithecines rarely survive more than a few weeks. They're too vulnerable to predators, too inefficient at finding food without the collective knowledge of a troop. If he finishes it, if he kills Scar, he becomes the dominant male. He gets first access to food. He gets mating rights with every female in the troop. His genes go into the next generation, while Scar's genetic line ends. Gray raises the rock again, and this time he aims for Scar's skull. This isn't instinct. This is calculation. This is proto-murder, driven by the same evolutionary logic that will eventually produce human warfare, human violence, human capacity for planned, premeditated killing. But before he can bring the rock down, Stub intervenes. The second-ranking male crashes into Gray from the side, sending both of them sprawling. And now Gray understands his mistake. He forgot about the alliance structure. Scar and Stub are allies, bonded through years of cooperative defense and hunting. By attacking Scar, Gray has threatened Stub's position in the hierarchy. This isn't just a fight between two males anymore. This is political. The outcome is inevitable. Gray, outnumbered and already injured, does the only thing he can. He runs. He breaks away from Stub, dodges around Scar, who's now on his feet, swaying but conscious, and sprints toward the tree line. The entire troop watches as he disappears into the acacia woodland, and they all understand what this means. Gray is now an exile. His chances of survival have just dropped from reasonable to nearly zero. Scar stands in the center of the clearing, blood dripping from his temple and his shoulder, and performs the victory display. Chest beating, threat vocalizations, displaying his canines to every member of the troop. The message is unambiguous. I am still dominant. Challenge me and die. But here's the thing about dominance in primate societies. It's temporary. Scar is injured, seriously injured. That blow to his temple might be a skull fracture. Even if it's not, he's lost blood, he's in pain, and his ability to defend his position has been compromised. The other males know this. Stub knows this. And within weeks, maybe days, Stub will make his own challenge. This is the treadmill of male Australopithecine life. Fight to achieve dominance, fight to maintain it, eventually lose it to younger, stronger challengers, and face exile or death. The average tenure of a dominant male in primate troops is typically 2 to 3 years. After that, age and accumulated injuries make maintaining dominance impossible. And what about Twist, the female whose impending estrus triggered this entire violent cascade? She's watching from the safety of a tree, her dead infant forgotten, her body already preparing for her next reproductive cycle. She has no choice in who mates with her. That will be decided by male dominance hierarchies and male violence. But she does have one form of power: cryptic female choice. In many primate species, females have evolved subtle ways to influence paternity even in male-dominated societies. They can time their sexual receptivity to coincide with moments when dominant males are distracted. They can mate with multiple males in quick succession, creating sperm competition that gives even low-ranking males a chance at fatherhood. They can form alliances with particular males through grooming and food sharing, relationships that occasionally translate into protected mating opportunities. Twist has been building exactly this kind of relationship with Gray, and now Gray is gone, fled into the wilderness, likely to die within days. But the investment wasn't wasted. Because reproductive strategies in Australopithecines aren't about individual mating events. They're about lifetime reproductive success. And that requires long-term thinking, relationship building, and alliances that span years. As night falls and the troop settles into the sleeping trees, the social order has been reaffirmed through violence. Scar remains dominant, though weakened. Stub has demonstrated his loyalty, strengthening his own position. Gray has been expelled, his genetic future uncertain at best. And Twist will mate with whoever the dominance hierarchy determines. Probably Scar, possibly Stub, maybe even one of the younger males if they're clever and lucky. This is sexual selection in action, Darwin's other great insight, often overshadowed by natural selection, but equally powerful. Natural selection is about survival. Sexual selection is about reproduction. And in Australopithecus Afarensis, sexual selection has created a species where males are enormous compared to females, where violence is routine, where the size and sharpness of canine teeth are honest signals of fighting ability. But here's what's fascinating. This pattern is already beginning to change. If we could fast forward 1,000,000 years and look at Homo erectus, our more direct ancestor, we'd see dramatically reduced sexual dimorphism. Males and females are much closer in size. Canines are smaller, less useful as weapons. The level of male-male violence has decreased. Something happened during that 1,000,000-year transition. Some evolutionary pressure shifted the balance away from male-dominated hierarchies maintained through violence toward something more egalitarian, more cooperative. And that something probably involves the very thing we've been discussing: food, but specifically a new kind of food that requires cooperation to obtain. We're talking about big game hunting, not the opportunistic scavenging that Scar's troop practices, but coordinated hunts of large prey that require multiple males working together, sharing risk and sharing reward. When reproduction requires cooperation rather than competition, when hunting success depends on alliances rather than individual combat prowess, the evolutionary pressure shifts. Males who can cooperate out-reproduce males who are just good at fighting. But Australopithecus Afarensis isn't there yet. They're still in the earlier stage, still caught in the sexual arms race where size and violence pay genetic dividends. They're still living in a world where the biggest, strongest, most aggressive males father the most offspring, and where females have limited agency in choosing their mates. The troop sleeps fitfully in the trees, each individual on a separate branch or cluster of branches, always alert for the sounds of predators below. Twist has chosen a spot near Stub, a calculated decision that suggests she's already thinking about post-Scar political realities. The juveniles cluster near their mothers. The remaining adult males sleep at the periphery, the first line of defense against nocturnal threats. Somewhere in the darkness, Gray is also trying to sleep, but his prospects are grim. Solitary males are prime targets for nocturnal predators: leopards, hyenas, the ever-present Dinofelis. Without the safety of numbers, without the early warning system of a troop, his life expectancy is measured in days, not weeks. But here's a strange thing about Australopithecines, something the fossil record hints at but can't quite prove. They might have had the capacity for what we'd recognize as social memory. They might have remembered individuals, even after those individuals left the troop. They might have even allowed exiles to return under certain circumstances, after tempers cooled, after hierarchies reshuffled, after the dominant male who expelled them was himself deposed. It's speculation, but it's grounded in what we know about modern primate behavior. Chimpanzees remember individuals for years. They form long-term alliances that survive temporary separations. They even occasionally allow exiles to return to the community. If chimpanzees can do this, it's reasonable to assume Australopithecines could too. Which means Gray's story might not be over. But for now, on this night, in this moment, he's alone in a world that kills the unwary with brutal efficiency. As dawn approaches, the troop will face a new set of challenges. Challenges that will test not just their physical abilities, but their social cohesion, their capacity for cooperation, and their ability to balance individual interests with group survival. Because in the world of Australopithecus Afarensis, every day is a test, and failure is always fatal. Childhood in hell. Growing up in a species without mercy. Dawn breaks on the troop's third day in this territory, and with it comes a sound that every Australopithecine learns to recognize before they can even walk: the screaming of an infant in distress. This isn't the ordinary crying of a hungry or uncomfortable baby. This is the high-pitched, desperate shrieking that means mortal danger. A female we'll call Notch, named for the distinctive notch in her right ear, a souvenir from a hyena encounter 2 years ago, is clutching her 6-month-old infant to her chest and running through the undergrowth with the panicked, lurching gait of someone who knows death is seconds away. Behind her, crashing through the bushes with terrifying speed, is a female spotted hyena, approximately 140 pounds of bone-crushing jaws and relentless predatory drive. Here's what you need to understand about spotted hyenas in Pliocene East Africa. They're not the scavengers of popular imagination. They're apex predators, with bite forces exceeding 1,100 pounds per square inch, more than double that of an Australopithecine, and sufficient to crack open elephant bones. And they've developed a particular taste for primate infants: soft, relatively helpless, nutritious, and usually separated from the protection of a full troop. Infant Australopithecines are, from a hyena's perspective, the perfect prey item. Notch made a critical error. She wandered too far from the troop while foraging, drawn by the prospect of a termite mound she remembered from the previous dry season. Termites are protein gold, hundreds of calories for minimal effort. But the mound was farther than she remembered, and she was focused on feeding, not on scanning for predators. By the time she noticed the hyena, it was already too late to climb to safety with her infant. So now she's running, and the mathematics are brutally simple. She's carrying extra weight, moving through unfamiliar terrain, and hyenas can maintain pursuit speeds of 35 miles per hour for several minutes. She can't outrun it. She can't outfight it. Her only hope is that the troop heard her infant's screams and is coming to help. But here's the dark calculus of Australopithecine social behavior. Why should they? Notch is a mid-ranking female, with no particularly powerful allies. Her infant is not related to most of the troop members. From a pure evolutionary perspective, risking injury to save her infant makes no sense. Unless you're the father, which is difficult to determine in a species without paternity certainty. Or unless you're building social capital that might pay dividends later. Scar hears the screams. His head snaps up from the fig he's eating, and for perhaps 3 seconds he calculates. Then he moves, not running exactly, but that distinctive fast walk that Australopithecines use when speed is needed, but climbing capability must be maintained. Stub follows immediately, as do 2 younger males. The females, interestingly, don't move at all. They clutch their own infants closer and watch. This tells us something crucial about Australopithecine society. Defense of troop members, especially infants, is primarily a male behavior. And it's not altruism. It's a form of mating strategy. Males who protect infants, even infants that might not be theirs, are demonstrating their value as coalition partners and potential mates. Females notice, females remember, and in the complex social calculus of who to mate with when given the opportunity for choice, males who defend infants have an advantage. Scar and the other males reach notch just as the hyena is closing for the kill. What happens next is a coordinated group defense that hints at the cooperative abilities that will eventually make the genus Homo the dominant species on the planet. But we're not there yet. This coordination is crude, instinctive, based more on shared threat response than on actual planning. The males spread out in a loose semicircle, each grabbing rocks, sticks, whatever weapons are immediately available. They're screaming, threat vocalizations designed to intimidate, to make them seem larger and more dangerous than they actually are. And it works, sort of. The hyena stops its pursuit, turns to face this new threat, and suddenly the predator is outnumbered 4-1. But hyenas don't give up easily. This female is hungry, possibly nursing cubs of her own, and she's made a substantial investment in this hunt. She feints toward Stubb, testing the defense, and when he flinches backward, she sees the weakness. She charges. Stubb takes the full impact of 140 pounds of hyena and goes down hard. The hyena's jaws close on his right thigh. Not a killing bite, but a holding bite, designed to immobilize prey while she repositions for a throat strike. Stubb is screaming now, a sound of pure agony, and the other males respond with a barrage of rocks. One rock, thrown by Scar with the accuracy that comes from thousands of hours of practice throwing objects at predators, threats, and rival males, hits the hyena square in the jaw. The impact is enough to make her release Stubb and reassess. Another rock catches her in the ribs. A third misses entirely, but explodes against a tree trunk inches from her head, showering her with splinters. The hyena makes her calculation. This meal is too expensive. She releases Stubb and retreats, moving backward while maintaining eye contact with the males, her jaws still displaying those massive carnassials designed to shear through bone. She's not fleeing in panic. She's making a tactical withdrawal, the sign of an experienced predator who knows when to cut her losses. Stubb is badly injured. The hyena's bite has torn through muscle in his thigh, and blood is pouring from the wound at an alarming rate. He can't walk, can't climb, can barely move. In the modern world, this would be a survivable injury. Stitches, antibiotics, physical therapy. In the Pliocene, it's almost certainly a death sentence. But Stubb doesn't die. Not immediately, anyway. The troop rallies around him in a behavior that continues to puzzle primatologists. Coordinated care of injured adults. Notch, the female whose infant Stubb helped save, begins grooming his wound. Not because she understands infection or healing, but because grooming is what Australopithecines do to strengthen social bonds. And right now, Stubb needs all the bonding he can get. Other females bring him food, figs, some honey they've found, even a few insects. The males maintain a defensive perimeter around him, and slowly, over the course of days, the wound begins to close. Not heal exactly. It will leave a vicious scar, and Stubb will limp for the rest of his life, but close enough that infection doesn't set in. Close enough that he survives. This is the paradox of Australopithecine life. Brutal violence coexisting with surprising compassion. A species where males will beat each other bloody over mating rights, will also risk their lives to save injured troop members. A species where infanticide occasionally occurs, we'll get to that, will also collectively care for vulnerable infants who've lost their mothers. But let's talk about those infants, because childhood in Australopithecus Afarensis is where the real story of human evolution begins to crystallize. And that story starts with a disturbing statistic. Approximately 40 to 50% of Australopithecine infants died before reaching sexual maturity. Let that sink in. Half of all children born into this species didn't make it to adulthood. The causes were diverse and horrifying. Predation, obviously. Leopards, hyenas, large raptors, even pythons took their toll on unwary youngsters. Disease and parasites were constant threats in a world without antibiotics or even basic hygiene. Starvation during dry seasons killed infants whose mothers couldn't produce sufficient milk. Accidents, falls from trees, snake bites, drowning in rivers during crossings, claimed others. And violence, both from within the troop and from rival troops, accounted for perhaps 5 to 10% of infant deaths. But the survivors, the ones who made it through this gauntlet, were being shaped by their environment into something remarkable. They were learning, at a rate and to a degree that exceeded any other primate species, how to navigate an impossibly complex social and physical world. Watch the juveniles of Scar's troop, the ones aged roughly 4 to 10 years old, and you'll see something that looks remarkably like human childhood. They play constantly. Wrestling matches that teach combat skills, chasing games that develop speed and spatial awareness, climbing competitions that hone the arboreal abilities that might save their lives when predators attack. But their play is different from that of other primates in one crucial way. It involves objects. Young Australopithecines play with rocks, sticks, seed pods, anything they can manipulate. They throw things at targets, sometimes each other, sometimes trees, sometimes just throwing for the sake of throwing. They stack rocks, they bang rocks together, they use sticks to probe into crevices looking for insects. This is object manipulation at a level that exceeds chimpanzees and approaches modern human children. And it's being driven by the same evolutionary pressure. In a world where throwing accuracy can mean the difference between driving off a predator and being eaten, where knowing which rocks are good for cracking nuts and which aren't can prevent starvation, object manipulation isn't play, it's survival training. One young male, perhaps 7 years old, we'll call him Dash for his speed, has become particularly skilled at throwing. He can hit a target the size of a mango at 30 feet with surprising accuracy. This isn't random. This is practice, and he practices for hours every day, driven by some innate understanding that this skill matters. And he's right. Throwing ability in Australopithecine males correlates directly with both survival and reproductive success. Males who can throw accurately are better at defending against predators, better at hunting small game, better at winning dominance fights. A rock to the head is more effective than teeth or fists. And females notice. When Dash reaches sexual maturity in another 4 to 5 years, his throwing ability will make him a desirable mate, assuming he survives that long. But physical skills are only part of the childhood curriculum. The more crucial learning involves social navigation, understanding the hierarchy, reading body language, knowing who to ally with and who to avoid. And this learning is brutal. Young Australopithecines receive no coddling, no protection from the harsh realities of troop politics. They learn dominance and submission through direct experience, being cuffed by higher-ranking individuals, seeing the consequences of challenging authority, watching what happens to males who lose dominance fights. A juvenile female, perhaps 6 years old, we'll call her small for obvious reasons, makes a critical mistake. She's found a cache of figs that an adult female has hidden for later consumption. Small is hungry. She's always hungry, because juveniles get last access to food, and she begins eating. The adult female, returning to her cache, finds Small gorging herself and responds with immediate, vicious violence. The adult female doesn't just chase Small away. She catches her, holds her down, and bites her repeatedly on the arms and shoulders. Not killing bites, but painful punctures designed to teach a lesson. Small screams, but no one comes to help. This is education. This is how young Australopithecines learn about private property, about hierarchy, about the consequences of theft. When the adult female finally releases her, Small has learned several crucial lessons. Food caches belong to the individual who created them. Taking another's food invites violence. The dominance hierarchy is enforced through pain. These are lessons that will keep her alive, or at least increase her chances, in the complex social world of Australopithecine troops. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Australopithecine childhood is the phenomenon that primatologists call practice infanticide. Young males, particularly those approaching sexual maturity, occasionally kill infants, not for food, not in dominance fights, but seemingly as practice for a behavior that will become important in their adult lives. Here's why. When a male achieves dominance in a troop, one of his first priorities is eliminating the offspring of the previous dominant male. This makes brutal evolutionary sense. If a female is nursing an infant, she won't come into estrus, meaning the new dominant male can't impregnate her, and his genetic clock is ticking. But if that infant dies, the female stops nursing and becomes sexually receptive within weeks. So infanticide, as horrifying as it sounds, is an adaptive behavior in males. It increases their reproductive success by accelerating female fertility. And young males who practice this behavior on unrelated infants are developing the skills they'll need if they ever achieve dominance. This practice is rare, perhaps occurring once or twice a year in a typical troop, but it's psychologically scarring for the entire community. When it happens, the victim is usually the infant of a low-ranking female who lacks powerful male protectors. The attack is swift and brutal, and the mother's grief, her vocalizations, her attempts to recover the dead infant, her eventual abandonment of the corpse, is painfully reminiscent of human mourning. But life goes on. It has to. In a species living on the edge of survival, there's no time for extended grief, no capacity for revenge beyond the immediate moment. The mother returns to foraging, her body already preparing for the next reproductive cycle. The young male who killed her infant faces no consequences beyond a few threat displays from other males. The troop continues its daily routine of foraging, grooming, sleeping, surviving. As the sun climbs toward midday and the temperature rises past 100 degrees, the juveniles retreat to the shade alongside the adults. But even now, they're learning. They're watching which adults form alliances, who grooms whom, who shares food with whom. They're building mental maps of the social landscape that will determine their own success or failure as adults. Dash, the young male with exceptional throwing ability, has been watching Scar carefully. He's seen how the dominant male maintains his position through a combination of violence, intimidation, and strategic alliance building. He's also seen Scar's weaknesses, the injuries from his fight with Gray, the slight hesitation in his movements that suggests pain, the way other males watch him with calculating eyes. Dash is learning that dominance is temporary, that strength fades, that the key to long-term success isn't just fighting ability. It's knowing when to fight, when to submit, and when to form alliances that will protect you when your own strength fails. Small, the juvenile female who was bitten for stealing food, has also learned her lesson. But she's learned something else, something more subtle. The adult female who attacked her is low-ranking and has no powerful male allies, which means that when Small reaches adulthood and establishes her own position in the female hierarchy, this is an individual she might be able to dominate. She's thinking several years into the future, calculating social debts and opportunities. This is the cognitive leap that's happening in Australopithecus Afarensis. The ability to think beyond immediate circumstances, to plan, to calculate social consequences across extended time frames. They're not doing this consciously, not the way modern humans might, but the neural architecture that will eventually support human-level strategic thinking is being built, circuit by circuit, generation by generation, under the brutal selective pressure of life in the Pliocene. As afternoon shades into evening, a new crisis emerges. The young female who broke her arm yesterday, the one who fell during play, is dying. The arm has become infected, and fever has taken hold. She lies at the base of a tree, barely conscious, while her mother grooms her obsessively and vocalizes distress calls that go unanswered. The troop faces a decision. Wait for the juvenile to die, which could take days, or abandon her and her mother and move on to better foraging grounds. This is the kind of choice that defines social species: individual attachment versus group survival. And the choice they make tells us something important about Australopithecine psychology. They wait. Not out of compassion, exactly. That's too human a word for what they're feeling.
But out of something that looks like loyalty, like social cohesion, like the recognition that troop members matter even when they're no longer productive. They wait for 2 days, during which foraging suffers and the entire troop's nutritional status declines. The juvenile dies on the evening of the second day, and her mother carries her corpse for exactly 1 day before abandoning it. The troop moves on, their numbers reduced by 1, their collective experience shaped by another encounter with death, in a world where death is the only certainty. But death isn't the end of the story, because what happens to Australopithecine corpses, how they're treated, how they're abandoned, what consumes them, tells us crucial information about the ecology of this world and about the first stirrings of something that might, in a few million years, become recognizable as human ritual behavior. The corpse of the young female lies at the base of an acacia tree, abandoned by her mother exactly 47 minutes ago. In the fading light of early evening, she looks almost peaceful. Curled on her side, her broken arm bent at an unnatural angle, her eyes closed. But this peaceful image is about to be shattered, because in the Pliocene ecosystem, nothing stays dead for long. The first to arrive are the flies. Within 10 minutes of the mother's departure, hundreds of them blanket the corpse, drawn by the chemical signatures of decay that are already beginning to emanate from the cooling body. These aren't just any flies. These are blowflies, the same species that will still be performing this ecological service millions of years into the future, and they're remarkably efficient. They lay their eggs in every available orifice: eyes, nose, mouth, the wound where the broken bone tore through skin. Within 24 hours, those eggs will hatch into larvae that will begin the systematic dismantling of the corpse. But the flies won't get 24 hours, because just as the sun touches the horizon, the real scavengers arrive. A spotted hyena, possibly the same female who attacked Stubb, possibly a different one, it's impossible to tell, approaches cautiously, nose testing the air, eyes scanning for threats. Hyenas are primarily nocturnal, and dusk is prime hunting time. But they're also opportunistic scavengers with no shame about stealing meals. A dead Australopithecine juvenile represents perhaps 30 to 40 pounds of meat, organs, and fat. A bonanza that could feed this hyena and her cubs for days. But she's not alone. From the opposite direction, drawn by the same scent of death, comes a pack of 3 Canis adustus, the side-striped jackal, a smaller canid, weighing perhaps 20 to 25 pounds each. They're bold despite their size, emboldened by their numbers, and they have no intention of letting the hyena claim this prize unopposed. What happens next is a negotiation, conducted entirely through body language, vocalizations, and strategic positioning. The hyena approaches the corpse and stands over it, claiming it through possession. The jackals circle, darting in and out, testing the hyena's resolve. One jackal gets too close, and the hyena lunges, jaws snapping shut inches from the jackal's hindquarters. The message is clear: I will fight for this. But the jackals are persistent. They've learned through generations of evolution that hyenas, while formidable, are also cautious about injury. A broken tooth, a torn muscle, even a minor wound can mean the difference between successful hunting and starvation. So the jackals continue their harassment, forcing the hyena to constantly defend the corpse, preventing her from actually feeding. This standoff continues for nearly 30 minutes, until a new player arrives. A pair of Torgos trachyleotis, the lappet-faced vulture, one of the largest vultures ever to exist, with wingspans approaching 10 feet. These birds are not patient waiters like modern vultures. They're aggressive, powerful, and perfectly capable of driving smaller scavengers from carcasses through sheer intimidation. They land heavily near the corpse, their massive beaks designed to tear through hide that lions struggle to penetrate, looking like weapons from a nightmare. The jackals immediately retreat. Even the hyena reconsiders, backing away several feet to reassess the situation. And then, with the efficiency of specialists, the vultures begin to feed. Their beaks tear into the corpse, ripping away chunks of flesh with mechanical precision. They're targeting the soft tissues first, organs, muscle, fat, consuming the most nutritious parts before other scavengers can claim them. Within 20 minutes, the corpse has been reduced to skin, bones, and connective tissue. The hyena, watching from a distance, waits for her opportunity. Vultures are powerful but vulnerable on the ground. Once they've gorged themselves and their crops are full, they'll struggle to take flight quickly. That's when the hyena will make her move. But for now, she waits, patient as stone, while the jackals circle nervously in the background. This is the fate of most Australopithecine corpses. Rapid consumption by an efficient assembly line of scavengers, each specialized for different types of tissue, each taking what they need before the next arrives. Within 48 hours of death, most Australopithecines are completely consumed. No trace remains. Nothing that will ever fossilize. Nothing that paleontologists 3 million years in the future will ever find. But occasionally, very rarely, something different happens. And those rare exceptions are why we know anything at all about Australopithecus Afarensis. The death of Lucy. A case study in fossilization. 30 miles north of where Scar's troop is currently foraging, a solitary female Australopithecine is dying. She's perhaps 12 years old, roughly equivalent to a human in their late 20s, and she's been alone for 3 days since her troop was scattered by a lion attack. She's injured, a badly sprained ankle from a fall, dehydrated, and delirious with fever from an infection that's spreading through her bloodstream. This female, whom paleontologists will eventually designate as AL288-1, but whom the world will know as Lucy, stumbles through the Gallery Forest along a river in what will someday be called the Hadar region of Ethiopia. She's looking for water, but her fever has disrupted her sense of direction. Instead of heading toward the river, she's moving parallel to it, deeper into the forest, away from any hope of survival. She doesn't see the ravine until it's too late. One moment she's pushing through undergrowth, the next she's falling, tumbling through space, her arms instinctively reaching for branches that aren't there. She hits the rocky bottom of the ravine 40 feet below with terminal force. The impact is catastrophic. Multiple bones break, her right humerus, her left ulna, several ribs, her pelvis. But most crucially, the impact fractures her skull, and death is instantaneous. One moment Lucy exists, the next she's gone. No pain, no fear, no awareness of the significance her death will hold for creatures that won't evolve for another 3 million years. Her body lies at the bottom of the ravine for less than 6 hours before the scavengers find her. But this ravine is different from the open savanna where most Australopithecines die. The steep walls funnel water during the rainy season, creating a microenvironment that's wetter, more vegetated, more sheltered than the surrounding landscape. When the scavengers arrive, first jackals, then vultures, finally a hyena, they struggle to fully access the corpse. The terrain is difficult. The body is wedged between rocks, and before they can complete their work, something extraordinary happens. It rains. Not the light, intermittent showers of the late dry season, but a torrential downpour, the first storm of the coming rainy season, dropping several inches of water in a matter of hours. The ravine becomes a torrent, flash flooding with the force of a fire hose. Lucy's partially scavenged corpse is picked up by the rushing water, tumbled downstream, and eventually deposited in a bend of the river where the current slows and sediment accumulates. This is the first requirement for fossilization: rapid burial. Lucy's bones, still largely articulated despite the scavenging, are covered by fine-grained sediment, sand, silt, volcanic ash, within 24 hours of her death. This sediment creates an anaerobic environment where bacteria that normally decompose bone can't thrive. The bones, instead of rotting, begin a different transformation. Over the following weeks and months, water percolating through the sediment carries dissolved minerals, primarily calcium carbonate and silica, into the microscopic spaces within Lucy's bones. This process, called permineralization, gradually replaces the organic material of her skeleton with stone. It's not a complete replacement. Some organic material, including fragmentary DNA, will persist, but it's enough to transform fragile bone into stone that can survive for millions of years. But survival alone isn't enough. For Lucy to become a fossil that humans will eventually discover, her bones need to remain in a depositional environment, a place where sediment continues to accumulate layer upon layer, year after year. They need to avoid the erosion that would expose them to weathering and destruction. They need to avoid the tectonic activity that would crush or scatter them beyond recognition. Lucy gets lucky. The Hadar region where she dies is part of the East African Rift System, a geologically active area where the African continent is slowly tearing itself apart. This rifting creates perfect conditions for fossil preservation. Rapid sediment deposition in river valleys and lakes, volcanic activity that provides datable ash layers, and minimal tectonic deformation that would destroy fossils. Over the next 3 million years, Lucy's bones remain buried under hundreds of feet of sediment. Volcanic eruptions periodically blanket the region with ash layers that will eventually allow scientists to date her death with remarkable precision. 3.18 million years ago, give or take 30,000 years. The continents shift. The climate changes from humid forest to arid savanna, and back again multiple times. Entire species evolve and go extinct, and through it all, Lucy waits. Until November 24, 1974, when a paleontologist named Donald Johanson makes a decision that will change our understanding of human evolution. He's about to return to camp after a frustrating morning of fruitless searching. But something, intuition, fate, random chance, makes him investigate one more ravine. And there, exposed by recent erosion, poking out of sediment that's been exposed to weathering for perhaps only a few months, he spots a fragment of bone. That fragment is part of Lucy's ulna. And over the next 3 weeks of painstaking excavation, Johanson's team will recover approximately 40% of her skeleton, an extraordinary percentage for an Australopithecine fossil, where most specimens consist of a few teeth or a fragmentary skull. They'll find evidence of her final moments, the fractured bones consistent with a fall, the healed injuries from earlier in her life that tell a story of violence and survival, the morphology that reveals she walked upright but climbed trees with facility. Lucy will become the most famous fossil in the world, the face of human evolution, the specimen that proves beyond doubt that bipedalism preceded brain expansion in human evolution. But she's only one data point.
For every Lucy, there are thousands, probably millions, of Australopithecines who died and left no trace. Their stories are lost forever, erased by scavengers, erosion, and the simple passage of time. The fossil record as crime scene. But the fossils we do have, fragmentary and incomplete as they are, tell stories that are almost forensic in their detail. Take the Tong child, discovered in South Africa in 1924, the first Australopithecine ever identified. This is a juvenile, approximately 3 to 4 years old, and the way it died tells us volumes about predator-prey relationships in the Pliocene. The Tong child's skull shows distinctive puncture marks on the top and around the eye sockets. For decades, these marks were interpreted as evidence of leopard predation. Leopards kill by biting the skull, and the spacing of the punctures seemed consistent with leopard canines. But more recent analysis has revealed a disturbing truth. The punctures match perfectly with the talons of large raptors, specifically the African crowned eagle. This child wasn't killed by a ground predator. It was snatched from the troop by an eagle with a 7-foot wingspan, carried into the air, killed with talon strikes to the skull, and probably fed to eagle chicks in a nest high in the trees. The fossil record preserves not just the bones, but the manner of death. A 3-million-year-old murder mystery solved through forensic analysis. Or consider the AL-333 site at Hadar, where paleontologists discovered the remains of at least 13 Australopithecus Afarensis individuals in close proximity, all apparently dying at roughly the same time. This is one of the most significant Australopithecine fossil sites ever discovered, and it raises a fascinating question. Why did so many individuals die together? The most likely explanation is a flash flood during the rainy season.
The Australopithecines were probably foraging near a river, when a sudden surge of water caught them by surprise. Most managed to escape, but these 13, a mix of adults and juveniles, males and females, were swept away and drowned. Their bodies were deposited together as the floodwaters receded, eventually buried and fossilized in the same sedimentary layer. This kind of catastrophic death event is rare but not unknown in the fossil record. It gives us a snapshot of troop composition, the age structure, the sex ratio, the size variation that individual fossils can't provide. From AL-333, we know that Australopithecine troops included multiple adult males, disproving early theories that they lived in single-male harems like gorillas, that sexual dimorphism was extreme, and that juveniles made up a substantial portion of the troop. But perhaps the most disturbing fossils are the ones that show evidence of cannibalism. Several Australopithecine bones from various sites show cut marks and percussion fractures consistent with deliberate processing. The kind of marks you see when someone is trying to extract marrow or remove meat from bone. And these marks predate stone tools by hundreds of thousands of years. Which means Australopithecines were processing other Australopithecines using their teeth, their hands, and simple hammer stones. This isn't necessarily evidence of hunting and killing members of their own species. Most of this cannibalism was probably opportunistic, consuming corpses they found rather than individuals they killed. But it's evidence that they viewed dead members of their own species as potential food sources, at least under conditions of extreme scarcity. This shouldn't surprise us. Chimpanzees occasionally engage in cannibalism, particularly of infants from rival troops. Many primate species will eat placental tissue after birth. The taboo against consuming members of your own species is largely a human cultural invention, not a biological imperative. For Australopithecines living on the edge of starvation, a dead troop member represented calories, protein, and fat, resources too valuable to waste. Back to the troop. The cycle continues. As night falls completely over Scar's troop, the juvenile's corpse is already being consumed 50 yards from where the troop sleeps. The hyena has finally claimed her prize, driving off the vultures and jackals through sheer persistence. Her powerful jaws are crushing bones, extracting marrow, consuming even the parts that other scavengers leave behind. By morning, there will be almost nothing left. A few fragments of skull, some teeth scattered in the grass, pieces of shattered long bones. Within a week, even these will be gone, scattered by other scavengers, weathered by sun and rain, eventually disappearing completely into the ecological cycle of the savanna. The juvenile will never fossilize. Her story ends here, unmarked and unmourned except by her mother, who will grieve in the only way Australopithecines can, through stress vocalizations, through reduced appetite, through subdued behavior that will last perhaps a week,
before the demands of survival reassert themselves. But the troop survives. That's the thing about evolution. It doesn't care about individuals. It cares about populations, about genetic lineages, about the transmission of adaptive traits across generations. The juvenile's death is tragic from an individual perspective, but meaningless from an evolutionary one. What matters is that Scar's genes continue into the next generation, that Twist will soon mate and produce another infant, that the troop as a whole maintains sufficient numbers to defend territory and find food. As the troop settles into sleep, each individual on their separate branches, their brains process the events of the day in ways we can only speculate about. Do they dream? Do they remember? Do they grieve? The honest answer is we don't know. The fossil record can tell us how they lived and how they died, but it can't tell us what they thought, what they felt, what went on inside those brains that were so much larger than a chimpanzee's, but so much smaller than ours. What we do know is that something was changing. Evolution was working on this species, sculpting them generation by generation into something new. The extreme sexual dimorphism was already beginning to decrease in their descendants. The brain size was beginning to increase. The teeth were becoming more human-like, less specialized for the tough, fibrous foods that required massive molars. Within 1,000,000 years, Australopithecus Afarensis would be extinct, replaced by more advanced species with larger brains, more sophisticated tools, more complex social structures. But their genes would persist, flowing into descendant species, eventually reaching anatomically modern humans who would spread across the planet and fundamentally alter the biosphere. Lucy's descendants, our ancestors, would eventually develop language, art, agriculture, civilization. They would build cities, write symphonies, split atoms, and walk on the moon. They would create beauty and horror in equal measure, would love and hate with equal intensity, would reach for transcendence while being anchored to the same biological imperatives that drove Scar and Twist and Lucy. But that's millions of years in the future. Tonight, in the Pliocene darkness of East Africa, a troop of 40 Australopithecines sleeps in the trees, their bodies adapted for a world that no longer exists, their genes carrying the seeds of a future they can't imagine. They are neither ape nor human, neither savage nor noble. They are simply what evolution has made them, survivors in a world that shows no mercy, living moment to moment, fighting for every meal, every mating opportunity, every breath. And in their struggle, in their violence and their tenderness, in their desperate drive to survive and reproduce, we can see the shadows of ourselves, not as we wish we were, but as we actually are. The descendants of creatures who survived because they were willing to do whatever it took, pay whatever price evolution demanded, and pass their genes forward into an uncertain future. Epilogue. The Long Shadow. What Australopithecus Afarensis teaches us about being human. 3 months have passed since we first encountered Scar's troop at dawn in the acacia woodland. The dry season has deepened, the temperatures have climbed, and the landscape has transformed into something that looks less like Eden and more like purgatory. Waterholes have dried to cracked mud,
The fruiting trees have exhausted their bounty. Every day is a calculus of calories consumed versus calories expended, and the math is increasingly unfavorable. The troop has lost 6 members in these 3 months. The juvenile with the broken arm, obviously. Twist's infant, who starved slowly while his mother's milk dried up from injury and stress. An elderly female, perhaps 15 years old, ancient by Australopithecine standards, who simply stopped eating one day, her teeth worn to nubs, her body too exhausted to continue the fight. 2 juveniles taken by predators in separate incidents. And Gray, the exiled male, whose partially scavenged corpse was found by the troop 2 weeks after his expulsion, his bones already scattered by hyenas. But the troop has also gained 3 members. A young male from a neighboring troop has been accepted after demonstrating his value through exceptional vigilance and willingness to share food. And 2 infants have been born, one to a high-ranking female, one to Twist herself, fathered by Scar during her estrus cycle 6 months ago. The troop's composition is now 37 individuals. The numbers fluctuate constantly: birth, death, immigration, emigration, but the overall pattern remains stable. This stability is itself an evolutionary achievement. Troops that are too small can't defend territory or warn of predators effectively. Troops that are too large strip resources faster than they can regenerate. 30 to 50 individuals seems to be the sweet spot, the Goldilocks zone where Australopithecine social dynamics work optimally. But stability doesn't mean safety, because as we watch the troop foraging in the brutal midday heat, something they normally avoid, but starvation makes desperate creatures, we need to confront an uncomfortable truth. Australopithecus Afarensis is doomed. Not today, not this year, but over the next 800,000 years, this species will be ground down by the relentless pressure of environmental change, competition for more advanced hominins, and the simple bad luck of living in a world where extinction is the norm and survival is the exception. By 2.9 million years ago, Australopithecus afarensis will be gone, existing only as fossils and as genetic ghosts in the DNA of their descendant species. So why did they fail? What killed off a species that had survived for nearly 1 million years, that had spread across East Africa, that had developed the foundational adaptations, bipedalism, tool use, complex social structures that would eventually characterize the human lineage? The climate catastrophe. The answer, as with most extinction events, is climate change, but not the gradual, manageable climate change that species can adapt to over thousands of generations. This is rapid, catastrophic climate change driven by the same tectonic forces that created the East African rift system in the first place. Around 2.8 million years ago, the climate of East Africa undergoes a dramatic shift. The relatively stable, warm, humid conditions that favored the mixed woodland savanna environment where Australopithecines thrived begins to break down. The continent is drying out, rainfall is becoming more variable and unpredictable, and the forests are retreating, replaced by open grasslands that offer less food and less protection from predators. This shift is driven by changes in ocean circulation patterns in the Indian Ocean, which in turn are driven by the uplift of the Tibetan Plateau thousands of miles away. Climate is a global system, and changes in one part of the world cascade through the entire planetary ecosystem. The Australopithecines, adapted for a specific ecological niche, find themselves in a world that no longer matches their adaptations. The fruit trees they depend on become scarcer,
The water sources they navigate by memory dry up or shift locations. The predator density increases as prey animals also struggle with the changing environment, forcing carnivores to hunt more aggressively and opportunistically. Every aspect of their finely tuned survival strategy becomes less effective. But the Australopithecines don't go extinct because they fail to adapt. They go extinct because something else adapts faster and better: their own descendants. The competition. Enter Homo. Somewhere around 2.8 to 2.5 million years ago, a new genus appears in the fossil record: Homo. The earliest members of our genus, species like Homo habilis and Homo rudolfensis, are different from Australopithecines in crucial ways. Their brains are larger, averaging around 600 to 700 cubic centimeters compared to the Australopithecine average of 400 to 500. Their teeth are smaller, less specialized for processing tough vegetation. Their bodies are becoming more human-like, with longer legs and shorter arms, indicating a shift toward fully terrestrial life and away from the climbing ability that Australopithecines retained. But the most important difference isn't anatomical, it's technological. Around 2.6 million years ago, stone tools appear in the archaeological record, the Oldowan tool industry, consisting of simple but effective flakes and cores created by striking one rock against another. These tools allow their makers to process food in ways that Australopithecines can't match. A Homo habilis with an Oldowan chopper can butcher a carcass in minutes, accessing meat and marrow that an Australopithecine would struggle to reach even after hours of effort. They can dig up roots and tubers more efficiently. They can defend themselves and their food from scavengers more effectively. And most crucially, they can exploit a wider range of food sources, making them more resilient to environmental variability. This is competitive exclusion in action. Two similar species competing for overlapping resources, with the more efficient competitor gradually displacing the less efficient one. It's not that Homo actively hunted Australopithecines to extinction, though that may have occasionally happened. It's that they were better at surviving in the new, harsher environment, and over hundreds of thousands of years, that advantage compounded into total replacement. Scar's troop, struggling through the worst dry season in living memory, has no concept of these deep-time processes. They don't know that their species is in decline, that their descendants will face increasingly difficult conditions, that in the evolutionary arms race between hominins, they're on the losing side. They only know that this year is harder than last year, that food is scarcer, that the old foraging routes don't work as well anymore. One day, perhaps 100,000 years from now, perhaps less, the last Australopithecus Afarensis will die. Maybe it will be an elderly female, the last survivor of a troop that's been whittled down by predation and starvation until she's alone. Maybe it will be an infant, born to parents who don't have enough calories to support reproduction, but whose bodies drive them to try anyway. Or maybe it will be a healthy adult male, killed by a Homo habilis wielding a stone tool in a conflict over a waterhole. However it happens, the species will end not with extinction by catastrophe, no asteroid, no volcano, no plague, but with the quiet fading that characterizes most extinction events. A gradual decline, a progressive loss of habitat and numbers, until one day there simply aren't enough individuals left to maintain viable populations. And then, silence. The genetic legacy. But here's the thing about extinction in a lineage like the hominins.
it's not really the end. Because Australopithecus afarensis didn't just disappear. They evolved into something else. Their genes flowed forward through descendant species, first into later Australopithecines like Australopithecus africanus and Australopithecus gari, then into early Homo, then eventually into us. When you look in the mirror, you're seeing the product of that 3 million-year journey. The body that walks upright, the hands that can manipulate objects with precision, the brain that can plan and calculate and imagine. All of these traits have their roots in Australopithecine adaptations. We are the children of Scar and Twist and Lucy, separated by millions of years and countless generations, but connected by an unbroken chain of genetic inheritance. And it's not just physical traits. The behavioral patterns we've been observing, the sexual dimorphism and male-male competition, the complex social hierarchies, the food sharing and coalition building, the violence and the tenderness. All of these are part of our inheritance as well. Modern humans still show signs of our Australopithecine heritage. Men are still, on average, larger than women. Sexual dimorphism hasn't disappeared, though it's dramatically reduced from Australopithecine levels. We still form complex social hierarchies, where dominance is contested and maintained through a combination of cooperation and conflict. We still share food with potential mates as a courtship strategy. We still form coalitions and alliances that shape our reproductive success. The violence, too, persists. Humans are one of the few primate species where males regularly kill other males over status and resources. Our homicide rates, our warfare, our capacity for systematic brutality. These aren't aberrations or cultural inventions. They're evolutionary inheritances from ancestors who lived in a world where violence was often the difference between genetic success and genetic oblivion. But we've also inherited the other side of Australopithecine behavior: the cooperation, the social bonding, the willingness to help injured group members even at personal cost. Humans are simultaneously the most cooperative and the most violent of primates, and both traits have deep evolutionary roots. The lessons of Lucy. So what can Australopithecus afarensis teach us? These creatures who lived and died in a world so different from ours that it might as well be an alien planet. What wisdom can we extract from their bones, their teeth, their fossil footprints preserved in volcanic ash? First, they teach us humility. We are not the inevitable endpoint of evolution, the pinnacle toward which all of life has been striving. We are simply the current representatives of one lineage among millions, shaped by the same random processes of mutation and selection that shaped Australopithecines, trilobites, and bacteria. If the climate had shifted differently, if the tectonic plates had moved along different vectors, if any of 1,000 chance events had gone differently, there might be no humans. There might be some other descendant of Australopithecines, or no descendants at all. Second, they teach us about the deep roots of human behavior. When we see war, violence, sexual coercion, infanticide in modern humans, we often attribute these to culture, to civilization, to recent historical developments. But the Australopithecine fossil record shows us that these behaviors are far older, far more deeply embedded in our lineage than we'd like to believe.
we've inherited a complex suite of behavioral tendencies, some beautiful, some horrifying, that evolved under very different circumstances than the ones we live in today. This doesn't excuse modern violence. Understanding the evolutionary roots of behavior doesn't make that behavior right or inevitable. But it does help us understand why certain patterns persist across cultures and throughout history, and why changing them requires more than just good intentions. It requires actively working against behavioral tendencies that are millions of years old. Third, they teach us about resilience and adaptation. Australopithecus afarensis survived for nearly 1 million years in an ecosystem that was constantly trying to kill them. They did it without language, without fire, without sophisticated tools, without any of the advantages we take for granted. They survived through social cohesion, through learning, through the accumulated wisdom of generations, encoded not in writing, but in behavior and memory. When we face our own challenges, climate change, resource scarcity, social breakdown, we can look to our Australopithecine ancestors for inspiration, not because they had solutions to our specific problems, but because they embodied the fundamental truth of survival: adaptability, cooperation, an unwillingness to give up even when the odds seem impossible. The final scene. The sun is setting on Scar's troop for the last time in our narrative. They've survived another day in a world that offers no guarantees of tomorrow. They're climbing into the sleeping trees, each individual finding their spot, settling in for the dangerous hours of darkness ahead. Scar, now showing his age, climbs more slowly than he used to. That head wound from his fight with Gray never fully healed, and he suffers from periodic dizzy spells that make climbing precarious. He knows, in whatever way Australopithecines know things, that his time as dominant male is ending. Stubb watches him with calculating eyes, waiting for the moment when challenge becomes viable. Twist nurses her new infant, the one she conceived with Scar 6 months ago. The infant is healthy, thriving in a way her previous infant never did, and she grooms him with the single-minded devotion that characterizes Australopithecine mothers. This infant represents her genetic future, her contribution to the next generation, her small defiance against a universe that is indifferent to individual survival. The juveniles settle into their sleeping spots, some alone, some clustered together for warmth and comfort. They've learned today's lessons about hierarchy, about food competition, about the constant presence of danger. Tomorrow, they'll learn new lessons, and the day after that, more lessons still, building the behavioral repertoire that might, if they're lucky, if they're smart, if they're ruthless when necessary and cooperative when possible, allow them to survive to reproductive age. Far above, the stars are beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, the same stars that witnessed the origin of life on this planet, the same stars that will witness the eventual extinction of every species currently alive. The Australopithecines don't look at the stars. They don't wonder about their place in the cosmos. They don't contemplate the deep time that stretches behind them and ahead of them. They simply exist, moment to moment, living the only way evolution has equipped them to live. But we, their descendants, their inheritors, the recipients of their genetic legacy, we do look at the stars. We do wonder. We do contemplate our place in the universe and the meaning of our existence. And when we do, we should remember Lucy,
remember Scar, remember Twist, and all the countless Australopithecines whose names we'll never know, whose stories will never be told, whose bones dissolved into dust millions of years ago. We should remember that we are here because they survived. Every single one of your ancestors, stretching back through 3 billion years of evolutionary history, survived long enough to reproduce. Every single one faced challenges, predators, starvation, disease, violence, environmental catastrophe, and overcame them. The odds against your existence are astronomical, and yet here you are, reading these words, contemplating deep time and evolutionary history. You are the most recent link in an unbroken chain that stretches back to the origin of life itself. You carry in your cells the genetic information accumulated over billions of years of trial and error, success and failure, survival and extinction. You are not separate from nature. You are nature. The universe becoming conscious of itself, matter organized in such a way that it can contemplate its own existence. Australopithecus Afarensis didn't know any of this. They couldn't. But they did the work anyway. They survived. They reproduced. They passed their genes forward into an uncertain future. They fought and loved and feared and struggled, not because they understood the cosmic significance of their actions, but simply because that's what evolution programmed them to do. And now, 3 million years later, their descendants sit in climate-controlled rooms looking at screens, reading about the lives of creatures who lived and died in a world that no longer exists. We've traveled further than Lucy could have imagined. We've achieved things that would seem like magic to Scar. We've built civilizations, cured diseases, split atoms, and reached beyond our planet into space. But we've also retained the Australopithecine core, the capacity for violence and compassion, for selfishness and cooperation, for brutality and beauty. We are still animals, still driven by evolutionary imperatives that are millions of years old, still struggling with the same fundamental questions of survival, reproduction, and meaning that our ancestors faced. The difference is that we know it. We can study our own history, understand our own evolution, recognize the patterns that shaped us. And with that knowledge comes responsibility. The responsibility to consciously choose which aspects of our evolutionary heritage we want to amplify, and which we want to suppress. We can't escape our biology, but we can, perhaps, transcend it. We can use our oversized primate brains, the ones that evolved from Australopithecine beginnings, to create societies that are more just, more peaceful, more sustainable than anything evolution alone would produce. We can honor our ancestors not by imitating their behavior, but by building on their foundation to create something new. As full darkness descends on the East African savanna, Scar's troop falls silent. 40 individuals sleeping in the trees, vulnerable but vigilant, waiting for another dawn that may or may not come. They don't know that their species has only 800,000 years left.
They don't know that their descendants will inherit the Earth. They don't know that 3 million years in the future, creatures who share their DNA but would be unrecognizable to them will dig up their bones and tell their story. They only know that they survived today. And tomorrow, if they're lucky, they'll survive again. That's all any of us can do. Survive today. Build for tomorrow. Pass forward what we've learned to the next generation, and hope that our descendants, whoever and whatever they become, will remember us with the same mixture of fascination, horror, and compassion that we feel when we contemplate our Australopithecine ancestors. We are all links in a chain that stretches from the distant past into an unimaginable future. Lucy and Scar did their part, lived their lives, and passed the torch forward. Now it's our turn. What will we do with our brief moment in the sun? What legacy will we leave for creatures we'll never meet? And when paleontologists 1 million years from now dig up our bones and reconstruct our lives, what story will our fossils tell? The answer is being written right now, in the choices we make, the actions we take, the world we build. We are the Australopithecines of the future, struggling, surviving, hoping that what we do today matters for tomorrow. And just like Lucy, we have no guarantee of success, only the opportunity to try. Author's note: the story you've just listened to is based on the best available scientific evidence about Australopithecus afarensis, combined with informed speculation about their behavior based on comparative primatology and paleoecology. While individual scenes are fictional, the underlying science, the fossil evidence, the environmental reconstructions, the behavioral inferences, represents current paleontological consensus. For viewers interested in diving deeper, I recommend starting with Donald Johansson's Lucy, The Beginnings of Humankind, Richard Wrangham's Catching Fire, and the technical literature on early hominin behavior and ecology. The story of human evolution is ongoing, with new discoveries constantly refining and sometimes revolutionizing our understanding. We are Lucy's children. Never forget that.